Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for the DiGiCo Product Tour webinar. Thank you for taking the time out to spend that with us. We are going to try to move as quickly as we can, get you through everything, but also stop and take your questions along the way. And this is where at least we're trying to go through the entire breadth of the DiGiCo product line through here. So first things, welcome. Thank you for joining us. The second thing is, though, I want to introduce some people that'll be helping me do this. First up is Dan Page. Dan is our brand ambassador from DiGiCo in the UK. So say hi, Dan.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Ryan.
So he'll be keeping me honest, make sure I'm sharing the correct details and facts, and of course, sharing his expertise along the way if there's anything that needs to be added there. We will be also joining us, sorry about that, joining us also is Matt Larson. So Matt is, I believe, somewhere in Texas right now from an undisclosed location, but thanks for joining us. So he's with Group 1 Limited, the distributor of DiGiCo here in the US. And then our producer behind the scenes is Kyle McMahon. Yep, love the control room, buddy. Green screen's working great. Thanks for joining us. My name is Ryan Shelton. I also work for Group 1 Limited. We are the distributors of DiGiCo here in the US. So we do a couple other brands here, and I'll switch over and start showing you a couple of things just so you can see a little bit about who we are. Group 1's been around for a while. We distribute various different professional audio as well as lighting brands. Everybody on this call, thankfully, only has to deal with audio, which I think we're all very happy about. But Blue Sky, their studio monitors, CalRec, broadcast consoles, DiGiCo, obviously why you're here today, Clang, which is now part of DiGiCo, and then XTA and MC Squared. So anyway, I think we just want to talk about a couple of things. If you're new to watching the YouTube stream, then you're actually, make sure you find the gear icon. That's in the bottom right-hand corner of the video you're watching right now. It looks like a little gear or a little sprocket. If you click on that, you want to make sure your quality is set to high, somewhere like 720 or 1080p. That's going to give you the best viewing experience for these. We're going to share slides, wire diagrams, examples, spreadsheets, tables, lots of detail in it. So the higher you have those settings, I think the easier it will be to read as well. And then if everything goes wrong with this broadcast, which of course we're all at our houses using our home Wi-Fi or hopefully wired in most cases here, but if something goes wrong, just hang on, watch the DiGiCo YouTube page, and if we have to reestablish another stream, that's where it'll come up and you can jump right back in there. So, hopefully nothing goes wrong, but that is the plan if something goes wrong. Anyway, without further ado, I think we'll just jump in here. So one of the first areas that I do like to start with when we're talking about DiGiCo is actually the core technology. What makes up DiGiCo, or what makes a DiGiCo a DiGiCo? And there's actually quite a few points in here. I'm going to go through these quickly, but we're going to talk about them a little bit as we go through. The first one is floating point processing. This has been near and dear to our hearts at DiGiCo since the very beginning of DiGiCo with the D5. So floating point processing, for those of you who are not familiar, is one way of doing math or doing the calculations when you're processing audio. Typically, you're going to see something like 32-bit float or 40-bit float, or you're going to see fixed point processing like 24-bit, 32-bit, I think there's up to 64-bit fixed point processing now. But we're going to talk about why you would want one over the other. And the two examples I always give to help just bring this home for those of you who are not super into this, I guess the term would be just a layman's example, is photo editing. This is something a lot of us are familiar with now in our days of just having to do this on our PCs and Macs. If you took a photo and you opened it in like Adobe Photoshop or some sort of Pixelmator or something on your Mac, you have the option to both zoom in and out of a photo as well as reduce the image size of that photo and how you handle those things. So if I took a picture, some photo from my camera, and I reduced the image size, so I physically made the image size smaller, I would actually be throwing out pixels. So it is physically getting rid of pixels to reduce the size of that image. So now the file size is smaller, there's less detail in there, and no matter what I do after that point, I'm never going to get those pixels back. Now, if I took an image and I just zoomed in and out of that picture, I would actually be all the data would still be there with that picture. I would just be physically making it smaller to me. So what I am viewing would be smaller. And this is one of the best examples I can give when you talk about floating point processing. You're not actually losing the detail as you go through a process, like turning down a fader, gain staging, busing something together, or channel processing, whatever that may entail. So it's a very, very important thing. How it actually works is you're actually able to keep the information of the sample together, and you're able to move the decimal point. So you're actually able to move it in or back out as needed based on the processing that's occurring. I did grab an excerpt from Texas Instruments when they're actually talking about this process, and there's a lot to read here, but it's actually quite good. Sampling sound at 24 bits of accuracy yields 144 dB of dynamic range. I'll take a quick aside, that's theoretical. You don't actually get that in the real world, which is why we moved to 32-bit A to D converters. We'll talk about that later. But that provides more than adequate coverage for the full amplitude range needed in sound reproduction. Wide coefficients in intermediate products, so that's floating point processing in a nutshell, provides a high degree of accuracy for internal operations, a feature that audio requires for at least two reasons. First, audio typically uses cascaded IIR filters to obtain high performance with minimal latency. But in doing so, each filtering stage propagates the errors to the previous stage. So a high degree of precision in both the signal and coefficients are required to minimize the effects of these propagated errors. So that means if there's a rounding error or quantization error, that actually gets pushed onto the next stage and then therefore amplified and processed again. Second, high accuracy must be maintained even as it approaches zero. So if you think about a sine wave as it returns back to the null point or back to zero, this is necessary because of the sensitivity of the human ear. The floating point format by its nature aligns well with the sensitivity of the human ear and becomes more accurate as floating point numbers approach zero. This is the result of the exponents keeping track of the significant zeros after the binary point and before the significant data in the mantissa. That is usually the main part of the sample. This is in contrast to a fixed point system for very small fractional numbers. All of these aspects of floating point real arithmetic are essential to the accurate reproduction of audio signals. Obviously, there's a lot going on there, but what this really entails is that floating point is what you should be using for processing audio. Yes, having massive accumulators, having great plugins or great modeling is wonderful, and all these things are important. Obviously, high quality mic pre is very important to the signal and the sound that you're reproducing, but floating point is by far the best way to do this. If you want more information about that, we're going to provide you with an email address later on. You can reach out to us. You can obviously do this through the comments as well. Dan and Matt and Kyle will be watching those as we go through this presentation, so you can fire back any questions you may have along the way for those of you watching live, obviously. So let's talk about the actual structure. How do our consoles work? What's the 10,000-foot overview of the architecture of our systems? So first and foremost, you have what's called the control surface. So this is the part that you're going to interface with most commonly as the user. So this is going to be touchscreens, this is going to be faders, mute buttons, anything that you may be controlling like a physical EQ knob. So those are physical controls on the control surface. And then you actually have the audio ports. So these are where the audio comes in and out. Some consoles have analog built right in on the back. Others, it's going to be MADI or an option card where you can choose the format. Now, underneath that, but still within the console, you have a PC. This is a generic term. We'll use Windows, sometimes we'll use Linux, sometimes depending upon the application. And then you have the audio engine. So here's our PC, here's our audio engine, and these are, for all intents and purposes, separate entities. Some consoles share them on the same PC board, but a lot of consoles even have them split apart, and we'll talk about why that is. Now, this next view, where you're looking at with the arrows, is actually how the audio and control data passes through the system. The orange lines are actually audio. So they are received via the audio ports, processed in the audio engine, and then returned back out the audio ports. Over here, you're going to follow like an input from the control surface. So if I muted channel number 1, that PC interprets the control surface muting channel number 1, and it says, oh, channel number 1 is muted, pushes that to the audio engine and says, hey, mute channel number 1, and now the audio will not be going back out to the audio port via that channel number 1. Now, what's important to notice is that these are gray. This is data and control. So we actually don't have audio floating between the audio engine and the PC. This is done on purpose. So the main reason for this is actually to be able to physically break the connection between the PC control surface and the audio engine and the audio ports. On most of the consoles, you're going to see a reset button on the back of them, including things like the S series or the Quantum or the SD series. You're going to have a reset button that physically restarts this portion, reboots without affecting this portion over here. So once again, if you have more questions on that, please let me know. Now, one of the other approaches and things you're going to see is that we actually have I/O racks. So these are actually very common with most manufacturers, but this is where you're going to see a bunch of the XLR mic pre's, XLR line outputs. So you're going to have an I/O rack here that communicates with the audio ports via either MADI or Opticore, or in some cases Dante, depending upon your protocol. And if you have more than one I/O rack, all of those are typically going to make a direct connection to the audio ports, a portion of the console. Things like Opticore and Dante may change how that flow works. This would be a good example of a MADI setup for those of you familiar with that. That being said, before we move on to this next slide, if you do want to learn more about the audio protocols that are available to DiGiCo and those that we use most commonly, there is another webinar that's available on this DiGiCo YouTube channel that goes into great detail on all those protocols, and you're welcome to watch that one and learn a lot more about that. So our audio engine is actually FPGA based. And why do we do that? Obviously, our R&D team evaluated all the available options and tried to figure out why FPGA. One of the things that they found out was when first we were already using FPGAs, and pretty much every console out there does use FPGAs. Typically, they were used for glue logic. That means connecting various routing mechanisms, handling audio routing itself or between DSP modules. We're able to use with Super FPGAs to actually put DSP on the FPGA. So it's one chip that primarily does everything. You're going to see in a minute that we use more than one when we need a lot. But in this case, this is just kind of a brief overview of it. DSP technology has been around for a while. This is typically called ASIC, or application-specific IC. Think about Texas Instrument like a Shark processor. I think their latest generation is called X-Shark. And then Motorola DSPs, things like that have been around for a long time. And they've been available to us, and we've used them in the past in various ways to do this. I think on the original D series, we used 39 Shark processors to be able to do what we replaced with one FPGA in our SD7 that was launched back in 2007. So anyway, DSPs, you need glue logic, something like an FPGA, to glue them all together. Anyway, they take a lot of power, and then just because of the sheer number of chips that you're going to have, they tend to be less reliable than newer technologies. x86 or Intel technology, this is what I commonly refer to as just a standard off-the-shelf PC component. A lot of the consoles out there right now are actually built on this, especially the newer ones. So they're using either AMD processors or Intel processors. It's not designed for real-time audio processing. That it is people that are taking an operating system that is custom made, kind of like a DOS or a Linux, and running it on top of those consumer grade PC components to be able to get it to do what they need it to do. Obviously, cost would be a huge reason why to do this. Being able to get a PC processor that's moderately powerful to be able to do these things, it would be, I think, beneficial to drive down the cost of your product in most cases. I think it's also a little bit easier to develop on, though I'm not a developer, so save that for the comment section. The real reason for FPGAs, though, is we can reduce dramatically the number of components that we need in a system. That means there's less power consumption, it boots faster, it's reliable, meaning lower power, lower heat. You don't need the glue logic, it is the glue logic. You can scale these, so with different series of FPGAs, we can take the code and we can scale it up and down, so we can build various products off of one code base. and there's no third-party hardware, software for large I/O counts. It just sees everything. It has massive throughput on the super FPGAs that we use, the current generations, and even the previous ones we used. And probably one of the most important things is that it's pretty much future-proof. One of the things I'm going to show you actually next is...
Ryan?
Yes.
So what you're saying is it's future-proof and it's scalable. Is that what you're saying to us?
That's what I'm saying to you.
Okay, I just wanted to check.
Yeah, and just kind of as an example of the future-proof aspect of it, one of the strong benefits of FPGA is that you actually get to determine the gate structure or the memory layer of how the chip is laid out. You're not reliant on somebody like Texas Instruments or Motorola to give you the gate structure for that application-specific IC, or somebody like Intel to actually work on the gate structure for you. You basically have a blank slate, and you get to design whatever it is that you need to design. Now, what you're actually seeing here on the slide is a thermal scan of the same FPGA running different firmware. So on the left, you're going to see that 5 years ago, this was kind of the current state of our FPGAs. So we just added processing blocks as we needed to. So we weren't necessarily, filling up the chip. I mean, it looks like we were getting close to it at some point. But then you'll feel, look, now with the current iteration, this is, basically running the same process. This is the same number of channels going through the same stress test. And you're going to see that the one on the right has far less ballooning, thermal ballooning, hot spots on the chip. It's much more even. And then if you're noticing down kind of on the right-hand side, that's free space, which is very important. So that means that we have processing overhead. We can either keep that as processing overhead or add features down the road, things that are going to need it just being more efficient. So we are doing a better job with the tools that we already have. And because they're scalable, because they're completely flexible, we can give you a better product down the road. The SG7, as I alluded to earlier, was released in 2007. With no hardware changing today, so not running something like a quantum engine, just running on the same SD7 engine, you are dealing with a more efficient, a better product today with no hardware changes. All the features that we've added over the years have been added into that product, into that same FPGA with actually no hardware changing. We didn't come back with mods. Most of the mods were all to do with power and stuff like that over the years. Mainly to deal with our US market here. Anyway, this is honestly just because I can. This is such a beautiful picture to me. This is the engine out of our new Quantum 7 console. So just truly stunning to me, and just truly a work of art. This is the audio engine. So there's not a PC on here. So this is actually the part that processes audio. It's about, I think, 10 inches, maybe 8 by 10 inches is probably a good US measurement to be able to give you an example of the size of this. If you're familiar with any of these consoles, and I'm going to show you them in a minute, but you're going to see MADI ports over here. Those are the physical MADI ports on the back of the console. So there's really a minimum amount of connections. My apologies, I can't talk today, but a minimum amount of connections to go from what you're talking like to a rack or to an I/O device, an audio I/O device, to talk to the actual audio engine. Anyway, so let me give you a quick tour real quick. So you're talking about FPGAs. Under that cool aluminum sunflower heatsink there, that is the Super FPGA number 1. It handles core routing, buses, matrix, things like that on there. And then you're going to have Super FPGAs 2 and 3. So on this engine, we actually have a total of 3 Super FPGAs. Numbers 2 and 3 handle channel and nodal processing. You notice there's no fan on those as well. There is a fan that pushes air through the chassis, but they're incredibly efficient, as mentioned before. Now you'll notice each FPGA has a companion X-Shark. So this is a Texas Instruments product. These are for effects processing as well as an FPGA control co-processor. So anyway, just controlling the FPGA for what it does. You're also going to see that there's an engine host processor. This is an ARM-based processor that handles a lot of the communication or control, I should say, between the PC and the audio engine. This back here is your octa-core expansion board. So if you've ever looked inside of your console, if you've ever gotten an octa-core addition to a product, this is actually a daughter PC board that gets sandwiched onto the main engine. That allows us 504 channels of audio to communicate between the fiber transceivers and the audio engine itself. Now you'll notice in this that we actually have this metal plate on top of this console, or on top of this daughter PC board. That was a modification that was done several years back and is available to all DiGiCo users. I know within the US it is free of charge, so if you have these and you don't have them for some reason, this is mainly applicable to those on touring industry that are moving their consoles around, but this just helps keep everything sandwiched together as they bounce down the horrible roads that we have through most of the country that we tour through.
Hey, Ryan,
yes,
Ryan,
sir.
that's also the exact same plate that you'll use for the SD racks. So while things are a little bit slow, people's inventories back at the shop, this would be a great time to open up the pod, make certain it has that metal plate, or open up the engine, make certain if it has the plate. If it doesn't, it's a good thing to put in, because what it's doing is just adding pressure to make certain that that FPGA or the optics chip doesn't get bumped out.
That's a great note. Thank you, Matt. All right, over here are the MADI ports that I mentioned before. So on this particular engine, we have 8 MADI ports. You may see the numbers scaled per size depending upon the engine or the console that it's on, but everything is basically a derivative of, like anything in the quantum range is going to be a derivative of this engine. You're going to have things like word clock, you're going to have video sync, you're going to have AES sync, you're going to have networking, and then a UB MADI, which is actually another audio I/O device for this engine as well. So this is just kind of giving you an overview of what's inside. As I mentioned before, it's basically all a derivative across the line. The SD series and the S series have 1 FPGA. The Quantum series are going to have 3 FPGAs in there. Now, let's talk about latency. One of the slides I had before with all the text on it was talking about why being fast in processing audio, right? I'm sure you can assume and draw your conclusions of why low latency is incredibly important. That's obviously important for musicians, primarily is the reason to keep this low. Monitor mixing applications, so whether you're doing that from front of house or a single console, or if you're doing that from a dedicated monitor console, you obviously want to keep that as low as possible. So you're going to see here that we have 5 different consoles, A, B, C, D, E, and 2 of these are definitely the fastest. You're going to notice poor brand C there is flexible, and this is these are class leading, so meaning people that try to compete with DiGiCo. As far as these are their specs off of their websites that are laid out. Brand C there, who I won't specifically mention, but they are flexible. So as you change the number of auxes, buses, things like that, stems from them, then they'll actually change your latency. So it's not deterministic. I would recommend on that brand highly that you don't put extra things in there you don't need. Now, if you look at brands B and brand E, so column B and column E, you're going to notice that these are the lowest. In fact, they're pretty close to each other. In fact, if we just highlight these for a second, you're actually going to notice that and I'll just go ahead and give it away. Both of these are actually DiGiCo. Brand B is actually, or the column B is with our 24-bit A to D conversion and D to A, and then column E is with our 32-bit D to A and A to D involved. So you're going to notice things like crosstalk goes significantly down by over 20 decibels. That's huge. Average noise goes down by 8 decibels. Dynamic range increases by 7. Also, back to the slide we were talking about, you can have up to 144 dB of dynamic range, but that's all theoretical. That's not usable for how any of these companies work and how any of this hardware works. So anyway, and then the other thing primarily notice here is the latency. We dropped from 1.33 milliseconds with 24-bit I/O to 0.89 milliseconds. So that is including microphone going into an A to D or mic pre 32-bit that is going through whatever transport medium you have, like MADI or octa-core, getting processed by a channel, getting processed by a bus, returning back via that medium and converted back to analog. So less than a millisecond with a normal processing chain applied to that console. All right, now let's talk about some supported technologies and supported digital audio formats. First up, you're going to notice things like AES-3, that's commonly referred to as AES-EBU, so an XLR with 2 channels of audio digitally over that. AES-10, that's commonly referred to as MADI. That is a standard that's been around since the early 90s. We go into more detail in this in our previous webinar about digital audio protocols. And that is common on just about all the DiGiCo products that we make. AES-42, most are not familiar with, but this is a protocol for digital audio mic pre's. We make that available in a card format for the SD, SD Mini, and SD Nano racks. And the AES-67 is supported through Dante compatibility. So they have a Dante has an AES-67 compatibility mode. That can happen via the SD card, the slot, I'm sorry, once again, just cannot talk today, SD card rack, and then the DMI card slots as well. Hydra 2 is a protocol from Calrec that allows for, I think, 8192 by 8192. It's basically a matrix and routing system that they offer, and this is available via a DMI card slot into the DiGiCo ecosystem. Aviom, of course, has been around for a long time and is supported on pretty much every product that we make. Allen Heath personal mixing systems are also supported via DMI card slot. Wave SoundGrid is built into a lot of our products. It's also available via an option card for those that have DMI slots. Opticore on anything Quantum and SD series is an option. On the higher end, it comes standard. We'll talk about that in a little bit. HD SDI is actually video, and we're actually not interested in the video, but we're interested in the audio that's embedded with the video. And this card is compatible with the SD rack, SD Mini, SD Nano, and lets us strip off audio, process it, return it back, control both video and audio latency. And then there's a proprietary protocol to the 4U4 and S series. It's called A3232, and this is a Cat5 based protocol for connecting to racks primarily. And as far as integrations go, this is one of those things that makes DiGiCo, I think, a little bit special. We started our integrations early on with partnering with Waves, and we early on had Waves into the SD series console. So we actually ran their multi-rack application, and they did a special version of that application for us to run on the consoles. Now, as that application grew and became more and more powerful, and they wanted to put things with higher graphics in there and more demanding graphics, it made a lot of sense to actually move it outside of the console, but the cool part is we retained all of the integration. And what that means is I can load a session on my SD or my Quantum console, and it will automatically load the corresponding session in Waves Multi-Rack or Super Rack. It goes a little bit deeper than that too. If I create a snapshot on my SD or my Quantum console, it will automatically create the corresponding snapshot for you on the Waves Multi-Rack or Super Rack. And then there's things like touch and turn. On all of our consoles, there's like a dedicated encoder and button that allows you to choose something specific and make adjustments via the encoder or the button. If I have a touchscreen or my Mac or my PC next to me running Waves Multi-Rack or Super Rack, I can select a parameter of that on that plugin, like a gain or a threshold, and I can use that encoder to be able to move that very precisely, very smoothly using an encoder, giving you a tactile control for those things. So, you know, and then to finish it out, if you save on your console, it'll save the corresponding Wave session as well. So it's a very deep integration. Although we physically run it on a different computer, this allows for everything to be a lot snappier in the system, just a lot quicker. It also answers one of the big feature requests we were getting for years, which is, can I have Waves on another screen? So this handles all of that as well. Now, you'll notice we also have LaISA integration. This is a format from Acoustics, a product they make. So they make a processor, but it's basically expanding stereo out to the entire audience, or at least to the majority of the audience. Those of you who are in live sound and mix in the front house position, you're probably very aware that a very limited portion of the audience actually gets that stereo or that spatial information. And LaISA is a proprietary algorithm that they've developed to spread that out across a vast majority of the audience, so they all get the perceived effect that something is panned to the right or to the left. So very cool stuff. Definitely research it if you're not familiar. You're going to see the Clang integration. We're actually going to show you that a little bit later and talk about how you integrate and control the Clang unit from the DiGiCo console. There's also generic OSC. So if you have any device or software that talks OSC, you can just hijack all the controls on the console and give yourself control, whatever makes sense for your application. MIDI, of course, has been around for a long time, still implemented. GPIO, so these are contact closures, and both on the input side and logic gates for the output side. MIDI timecode and MIDI machine control, those are all included into the software as well. Now, DS100, this is a really open platform version of basically, think Dolby Atmos for live. There's probably DMB people cringing at this, but that's how I think about it. It's completely scalable. You can do anything from a basic line across the front, or you can go overhead around your venue. I've seen it applied in one arena where they actually set it up around the ice so that every zone was individually addressable and they could make sound move between all those, and that was pretty awesome. Anyway, this is under development, integration with DS100, so that's on the way, and of course, more to follow. Even during these times, the DiGiCo R&D team has not stopped. They are moving forward both with integrations, features, and hardware.
Hey, Ryan, let me throw something out also. One thing that I think you can see when you look at the DiGiCo product line is they're very good on making certain that we can actually integrate with anybody's system. So as new protocols come out, our R&D guys are pretty in tune with what's coming out there. If you're working for a company or team and you know of a protocol, there's a protocol that currently we do not have, and you have some interest, feel free to send us an email, because we always want to try to make certain that we're the most flexible manufacturer out there.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that. Dan, Kyle, Matt, did we get any questions yet on anything that we should stop at this point, or should we keep going?
I think we're good to carry on for the minute. There was a question about some latency bits, but I think maybe we'll come to that in a Q&A section later.
Sounds great.
Jay also said he loves this webinar.
Fantastic. All right, so let's start taking you through the products. So the first up in the list is the Quantum series. For those of you who are not familiar, we actually introduced this a couple of years back with the Quantum 7, or the SD7 with new engines or Quantum engines in it. So this is the SD7 with Quantum's engines, and that's what I'm going to take you through now. This takes a console that would be 13 years old, and gives it an entire new PC and audio engine. So without having to replace your console, we are physically putting new audio engine and a PC in there that's in one box, in one chassis, that gets pushed into the back of the console. Now, for all intents and purposes, this gives you a brand new console. I mean, if you had dirty faders, you still have dirty faders and you need to clean those. But as far as the physical surface goes, the new PC, it's much, much faster, able to load sessions, transfer, mirror, all those things faster. But also, we had a lot of people running into physical limits of the system, which is still hard to believe. The previous one allowed for 253 channels of audio processing, and there were plenty of users out there running into those limits. So item number one was to create a larger engine, and I think they did that. You'll see here that we allow for up to 688 processing channels now, 256 input channels, 128 buses, so those are like auxes and groups, and then we have something that's very new to the industry, that's 256 channels of nodal processing. Nodal processing is actually the ability to be able to have, let's say, a kick channel. So channel number one, of course, right? We have kick coming down that channel, and I would actually like a separate EQ and dynamics for the drummer listening to channel number one. So aux number one on channel number one. He can have his own EQ and dynamics applied to it, and it can be different for the bass player on aux number two. It can be different for the guitar player on aux number three. It can be different for the lead singer on aux number four, who is most likely going to want something very akin to what they would hear in the studio or out front, in front of house. So, you know, heavily gated, heavily comped, really scooped on EQs, and a very produced sound to those drums. Whereas the drummer on aux one probably doesn't want that, probably wants it a little more raw, gets mad at you anytime gates are turned on, etc. So instead of having to double, triple, quadruple patch a channel, we're able to put one channel, the kick channel, and we're able to change the processing that's going from individually out to those auxes. Now, Obviously, you may run into a threshold at some point in time. 256 channels is a lot, but if you were doing, 10 channels or 10 auxes per channel, you would get there quickly. But this is definitely one of those exception type situations. We don't expect you to use on every channel and every aux, but when you need it. So that lead vocal may have different processing when it returns to the lead singer's ears, and it may have different processing once again when it returns to the drummer or the band. In addition to that, you're going to have 48 plus 4 motorized touch-sensitive faders. Now, what we're saying is there's a bank of 12, a bank of 12, a bank of 12. Those are all 100 millimeter faders. You have 2 assignable masters here. Those are 100 millimeter faders as well. And then you have 60 millimeter short throw faders. This is a bank of 12 up here, and then 2 assignable 60 millimeter short throw faders up here. So that should give you a total of 52 faders across the surface. One of the reasons this surface is so popular. There's just a lot of handles on this console, especially for monitor engineers who like to have physical handles in front of them, as I definitely do as well. Now, all of the encoders on here are backlit RGB encoders. That means that as you select or they're assigned to a specific control, like high pass or low pass or mic pre's or gain or something like that, the LED ring is going to illuminate based on the color of that function. It's a very intuitive interface, a very intuitive way to actually know what you're controlling on the console. There's also a dedicated video monitor with source select, so you're actually going to see that guy here. So it can take 3 separate sources into it, as well as its own self view. There's a camera built in there for pushing over a fiber optic connection to monitors, broadcasts, other consoles you may have. And then obviously one of the things that most know and love about DiGiCo, you actually have 5 LCD macro buttons, and then there's 8 banks. So you have a total of 40 macro buttons on this surface as well. Very convenient right there up above and just to the right of the master screen. All right, now what makes this console special is this. This is the Quantum 7 engine. This resides in the back of the console. I'm going to show you that in a little more detail in a minute, but I want to show you what you're dealing with here. First, you have 8 MADI connections. So you're going to see MADI 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It also can be set up with redundant, meaning that if I want to make 1 redundant, it would give me 1 as my primary, and 2 would become the redundant to 1, and allowing me to have a redundant MADI connection if that's something you needed on this engine. You're going to see things like word clock, video sync, and AES sync, as mentioned before on the engine, that UB MADI as well. Now, beneath those connections, you're going to have 2 DMI slots. We're going to go through DMI in a minute. Just to know, they're option cards. We can choose various formats. As new formats come out, you'll have new cards. You'll be able to connect and control these protocols in various ways. Up at the top, you're going to have a Waves port. So this is a 64 by 64 channels at 96K. That allows me to connect to Waves sound grid built right in. If you're not using the plugins, you can actually do some multi-track recording or at least playback through this connection as well. And then you're going to see Opti-Core. This is Opti-Core Loop 1 and Loop 2. In the US anyway, it is standard to have Opti-Core on Loop 1 and Waves as part of the Quantum 7 package that you're going to get. Loop number 2 has always been optional. I know this varies in different parts of the world, but just to give you an idea of what you're dealing with. All right, so here you are on the back of an SD7 Quantum. So you're actually going to see that there's an A engine and a B engine. This is one of those things that makes the Quantum 7 so unique and so special. It actually has 2 redundant engines into the chassis. So these are not external. These don't sit in a rack mount chassis. These are built right into the back of the surface. So everything I just told you about with engine number A, we actually have for engine B as well. You're going to see things like local I/O that are on board. So things like your XLR's analog in, local out, and then AES in and out. You're going to see things like GPI, GPO, MIDI in and out and through, those video inputs that I was talking about before for that dedicated video display. You're going to see expansion cards. So this is fitted with the additional GPIO as well, additional MIDI connections, and then of course redundant power supplies. Matt, anything else you think we should cover on the back of this console? Did he mute himself? Probably caught him off guard there. All right, I'll keep going then, and you can chime in a minute. Quantum 5. So this was announced at NAMM this year, so far the only audio trade show we've had in 2020. So the Quantum 5 is once again taking the SD5 and building a new engine for that. So once again, that's a new PC, that's a new audio engine, which of course leaves the same surface, which is pretty amazing. 12, 12, and 12 of 100 millimeter faders. There's one assignable master. Once again, these are all touch-sensitive motorized faders. You're going to have scribble strips above each channel that are LCD scribble strips. You have 10 macro buttons by 4 banks. So over here are your bank selections, and then 10 macros. You have dedicated overview or meter screens. I'm sorry, those are definitely your meter bridge screens. Each of these consoles does have an overview screen that's available to that as well. Now, as far as engine specs goes, we'll have more details on this as we get closer to launch. You should be expecting somewhere around 458 total processing channels, basically up to 256 inputs, 100 up to 128 auxes, groups, etc. We call those buses. And then you'll have 128 channels of nodal processing. In addition to that, you'll have things like your matrix, solo buses, etc. Now here's a little more detail on that engine as well. You're going to notice that we have 8 MADI ports set up in the same fashion as before. They could still be set to be redundant. You're still going to have word clock, video sync, and then AES sync as well. You still have DMI slots. You still have opticore. Waves comes as standard. Once again, if you're in the US, waves and opticore are standard on this console. You still have that UB MADI. So there's a lot packed into this tiny little option. Optical loop number 2 is an option if you need it as well. So if you need additional I/O. Now this is the back of the SD5. You're going to notice the same type of things. We have local ins and outs, both analog, and then you have AES, MIDI in and outs, and then there's GPIO over here, and then that engine is fitted on the back. So the SD5 does not have redundant engines. It is a single engine, as are the rest of our product range. You can always take 2 consoles and mirror them together if you need redundancy for an important venue or event. Now, this is the newest console. This is the Q338. This is a brand new design. So rather than taking an existing console and building in a replacement engine for it, this is a ground up design. Now, the beautiful part about this is we have some very tried and true workflows. So it's going to feel very natural to anybody that's been on the DiGiCo platform before. But at the same time, it gave us the opportunity to be able to crank up the graphics abilities of the console, put in new daylight viewable high-res capacitive touch LCD screens. These will get up to 1,000 nits of brightness. If you're not familiar with what that is incredibly bright. Brighter than like a Pro Display XDR from Apple, or a lot of the televisions that are even HDR10, things like that you're going to see in your home. So incredibly bright displays. They don't have the resistive layer over them, so even less, they're not getting dimmed by that layer as well that'd be over there. This console has 286 total processing channels, so that's 128 input channels, 64 buses, 64 nodes of channel processing. It's got 36 faders plus 2, so 3 banks of 12 plus 2 assignable masters here. It has new TFT displays as well for the channel scribble strips. These are incredible, mainly black backgrounds on those, just helping the console be a little bit darker, but then also so your attention can be drawn to it when something is selected, so whether that be a channel or a bank or something. It has 10 macro buttons that feature these same TFT displays, and they have their select buttons, and then you have 4 banks. So you still end up with 40 macros, so 10 are displayed on that screen at a time. It's also got little unique features, like you have an LED light bar underneath that can be blue or white, and that is dimmable as well. And then backlit RGB encoders, just like the rest of the line that you've seen. Now here is a close-up of the engine on the back of this console, and you're actually going to see very common to what we've seen before. So you're going to see your MADI ports on here. You're going to see there's 6 MADI ports. They can be set to be redundant as well. You have things like your word clock and your AES sync. You have your UB MADI, your DMI slots, and then there's a waves connection here, and then you have your opticore loop 1, and then your opticore loop 2 would be optional. So like on the rest of the consoles, we're just not showing it here. You're going to have things like a display port to go to your overview screen, USB connections for keyboard, mouse, etc., and then console networking, and then of course the power supplies you can see in here. So here's just kind of a full shot of the back of it. So you're going to see things like your local I/O, once again, analog in and out. These actually feature 32-bit mic pre's and 32-bit D to A converters. Standard AES in and out here, MIDI, GPI, GPO, all those things continue to be standard across the line on the Quantum consoles. Yes, sir.
Hey, Ryan, can you go back one slide? I want to point out one thing. When you look at the optical loop, it shows two of the HMA connectors. And somebody pointed out last week they thought that was the second loop, that second connection. When in reality, when you look at the rack or you look at the actual desk, that is an A and B connection. Each one of those has a transmit and receive, and that is the first, we'll call it loop A, or loop number one. And it's not until you add another set of the HMAs do you have the second loop active.
Thanks, Matt. I will once again say that if you want to go more in depth on optical or any of the digital audio protocols, there is another riveting 2.5 hour, what was it, 2.5 hours, guys? I can't remember, somewhere around there.
It was.
Yeah, it's a very riveting webinar that you can definitely look through, get a lot more detail on how the system is actually deployed, how it should be connected. There's also various connectors that are available. So the ones we're showing here are HMA connectors, as Matt mentioned. Those are expanded beam connectors. They have 2 strands of fiber inside of those in a single cable. We can also fit these with optical con and with ST. Our most common are HMA and ST, but also for more information, definitely refer to that other webinar that's available under the videos section on the DiGiCo YouTube page. All right, so let's go through the SD series. So the SD10, this is a large format digital audio console. It has been around for a little while now, and I would argue that it is the workhorse of the industry. You can find these just about anywhere, especially in the US. I know you can pretty much find them anywhere in Europe. So no matter where you're touring, where you find yourself, you're probably going to find an SD10. SD10 has 144 input channels, 64 output buses. It has banks of 12, so you're going to have 36 faders, 100mm faders plus a master. And then it has 10 of the macro LCD buttons and by 4 banks. So you're going to end up once again with 40 macro buttons on there. A single display. A lot of users actually find this faster. Kind of once you get used to the workflow of pushing everything to the center screen. I know for usability aspect, especially if you have 2 people on the console, something like the Q338 or the Q5 or the Q7 have multiple screens is always nice. But as far as the SD10 workflow goes, I do enjoy mixing on this console. There is the back of the console in here as well. So you're going to have, once again, the same type of commonalities. You're going to have your analog in and outs, your AES in and outs. You're going to have your optical loops, your GPIO, your waves. Your audio engine is down here, so you're going to see things like your MADI connections. So this actually looks like it is 4 connections. It is actually 2 redundant connections. You're going to have a word clock as well, AES sync, redundant power supplies, network connections, etc. In the US, at least, waves is standard, opticore is standard on the SD10 as well. There is a short frame version of this. So if you cut off the left-hand side, this left bank of faders and encoders, you can deal with a very short, compact console. These are really helpful for a number of small performing arts venues. We've had a couple of churches with very small spaces to be able to do a monitor mix position, things like that. This is where this really excels. It has all the same DSP, all the same connectivity on the back of it. You're just dealing with 1 bank less of faders, and I think it's about a 5% decrease in price, if I remember correctly on that. But all the same features, flexibilities, controls, just a physically smaller left to right format for that. Now, we also take the same engine and we shove it in a rack mount chassis. This is primarily used for redundancy. So a lot of our theater friends that are out and about touring, they love redundancy. We're behind them on that and want to support them in that. And that's where the SD10RE comes from. It is designed, once again, to be a redundant engine. So this chassis right here will go in. It has all the same features and all the connectivity that you have on an SD10, just crammed into a 3U rack mount chassis. Now, we also provide a backup fader wing for this. So the idea here is that this can go on a slide out drawer or just stay in your rack if needed, once again, for an emergency or redundant scenario. Now here's the SD8. The SD8 has a very similar layout to the SD10, slightly different design as far as the chassis goes. It's 120 channels, input channels, 48 output buses, and it has 36 motorized faders plus a master. And on the back, you're going to have things like local in and outs, AES, BNC connections, and then Opticore is optional, both for the SD8 and then the short version of that as well. So these are available. I'm not going to show you the back because it looks basically like an SD10 on there as well. Now the SD12 is also one of our newest consoles, as definitely the newest in the SD lineup. It is 96 channels. We do make a 72 channel version of this, but primarily everybody is going with the 96 channel version. If you did have a 72 channel version initially purchased, you can upgrade to the 96 channel version as well if you do need a little more DSP. So 96 input channels, 48 output buses. It has 24 by 12 touch sensitive faders, so bank of 12, and 2 assignable masters. You're going to have RGB backlit encoders, and then 5 macro buttons by 5 buttons. So you end up with 25 LCD scribble strip macros that you have available there. It has an integrated light bar at the top once again, as well, of course, dimmable and controllable there as well. On the back of the SD12, all the same things we've been talking about, but since the SD12 is the newest in the lineup of the SD series, you're going to see that we actually added those DMI slots to this engine as well. So here we've housed it with a Waves card and then an AMM card. So we're going to go through that in more detail as well. You're going to see there's a UB MADI connection. This is also MADI BNC, so two MADI ports on there. And then you're going to see things like your Opticore, which is optional on the SD12. So you can add your 1 or 2 loops to there. GPIO, local IO, MIDI, all that is standard on board. You have redundant power supplies, your overview screen, USB connections, networking, all of that is available on the back of this console. All right, the SD9, this is another workhorse from around the industry. So the SD9 is 96 channels, 48 buses, 24 motorized faders, optional waves, optional Opticore. On the back, you're going to have your local mic line ins, your analog outs, AES in and outs. You're going to have things like BNC connections to racks, as well as a D-MADI connection, which is a twisted pair or a MADI Cat5. So it's not a typical packet-based protocol. It is actually MADI over a Cat5 or a Cat5e is our minimum required for cabling. You're going to have things like your MIDI as well as GPIO still standard, redundant power supplies, etc. on this console. And then the baby of the family, this is the SD11. If you remove these side cheeks, so these are all just have some bolts that come in, you'll see them there. Take those out. This actually has integrated rack rails. So this is our only rack mountable console with a screen and faders attached to it. It's 13U, so it's rather big, but you get the same workflow, the same features, the same software, file compatibility between the SD11, anything in the SD range, anything in the quantum range, we can convert back and forth between on these consoles. You're still getting macro buttons available on these. You still get things like 2 solo buses. You still have your 12 touch-sensitive motorized faders, bank selections. It's all just incredibly compact and squeezed in here. Obviously meant for portable applications where you don't have a lot of space. We've also seen a number of these deployed in broadcast environments where they need to be able to embed, de-embed audio signals from maybe a router that's handling MADI integration or something like that. Here's the back of the console just to give you a little more detail. You're going to have 16 mic line ins, 8 analog outs, pair of AES. You're still going to have MIDI, GPIO, GPO, your connections for networking, USB, overview screen. Waves is still has options. And then this chassis, this photo does not show it, but we can actually add in to this. We can actually add in Opticore now into the SD11. And then, of course, there's only room for a single power supply, but we do actually make an option to be able to remote that power supply and, once again, give you redundant if you need it. All right, let's go through the S series. So the S31, we consider that a small format digital mixer. It is 48 inputs. These are pretty special though because they're flexi inputs. Flexi, just for you to give you kind of a brief idea, means a single channel, meaning channel number 1 can be mono or stereo. It does not take away from channel number 2. It does not pair with channel number 2. It can, but it doesn't. And then we can also, we don't take away from channel number 48. It is actually channel number 1 can be mono or stereo. In fact, all 48 channels can be mono or stereo. Yes, you could have all 48 stereo, and you could be using 96 mic pre's or input streams from various formats into this console. So there's a lot of power under the hood. The goal here was for you, the user, to not really have to think about stereo allocating for channels on the console. So if you're using a mono guitar one day and he moves to something like a Kemper or a Fractal or a Line 6 or a Pod, some type of pedal board, and now he wants to go in stereo, you just take the same channel on your console and you make it stereo. You will need 2 microphone pre's for that input, but as far as the layout on your console goes, nothing has to change. You just change to a stereo input. Things like playback sources as well, there's just no need to eat up 2 channels for those unless you really need it. Things like effects returns as well, those can be stereo channels. You don't have to eat up 2 channels or 2 faders for those if you don't want. Also, in addition to those 48 flexi inputs, we have 16 flexi buses. Remember, for us, buses are auxes or groups, so those are freely assignable between the two. So we could have all 16 groups. Those could all be mono, or you could have all 16 groups stereo. So flexi works the same way here. Same thing with auxes as well. If I had a lot of in-ears that I needed to do for a band that didn't have a huge budget, we would be able to take this console and give them 16 stereo auxes from this one console. In addition to that, you're going to have your left-right stereo master, 2 mono stereo solo buses, and then you're going to have on the S31 31 motorized touch-sensitive faders. So these are actually in banks of 10. So you're actually going to have 10, 10, 10, and 1. We're going to take you through a little more tour of this in a second. On the back of this console, you're going to see 24 by 12 mic pre's, 12 analog outs, and in fact, I have another slide showing you some more detail, so let me jump to that. So here are your 24 mic pre's. Here are your 12 analog line outs. Here's your pair of AES in and outs, and right here is that reset button. So you're going to see an R, it's recessed. You need to get a tweaker or a pin or a paper clip in there to be able to do this, but that will reset the PC. In this case, it's a Linux compute ARM processor that's doing the CPU portion on this console, as well as an FPGA audio engine. So it's actually going to disconnect those two, as we talked about before. The audio engine will continue to run just as it did before, but the PC and the control surface will restart. Next over, you have word clock in and out. You have GPI in and outs. You have USB connections, dual gigabit networking connectors over, those are Ethercon connectors. They are in a switched configuration. And then you're going to have a DVI overview screen, which currently mirrors the far right screen on the console. And then you have a UB MADI connection, and then you have your 2 DMI slots. So we're not showing you anything in here for these, but that is the way it is typically comes when you order it. You can add a MADI card if you would like MADI. You can add a Dante card if you would like to run Dante. If you need a whole lot of MADI, you can have 2 MADI cards. And if you need a whole lot of Dante, 2 Dante cards. You can do MADI over Cat5 or MADI B and C. Basically, whatever protocol you need to connect to, you can make that happen. So this is the S31, and I thought I'd show you a little bit more detail on how this is actually laid out. And I've actually blanked out the surface so I can show you these kind of one at a time. So first off, you're going to notice that over here we have a USB connection. This is for saving, loading show files, etc. And then we have 3 capacitive touchscreens. So these are a lot like a screen you'd see on something like an iPad or a high-end tablet. And so they're glass capacitive screens. And then you just select your channel on here as well. Well, I believe Tom has done some awesome videos on taking you through the software, getting up and going. That is another series of videos that's available on the YouTube page as well. So this is going to let you be able to just kind of give you an overview of how the software works. I'm trying to give you a physical overview of this console. Beneath every channel, you have an assignable encoder. So if you do a long press on something like the EQ section, these will actually assign to a high-pass filter. If you do a long press on aux number 2, you'll actually be assigning this onto aux number 2 across the console. So now you'll have quickly assigned to your encoders whatever parameter that you need to control per channel. To the right of the far right display, you actually have assignable encoders, and these are meant to assign and control the various portions of the channel strip. They'll also assign to whatever you have going on. So if I pull up a compressor, for example, it's going to go to that far right display, and all of these encoders are going to change to follow the assignments that are available for that compressor that I have available or that I'm adjusting on whatever channel. You're also going to have a meter bridge. So this is just your high resolution meter that's available for your master or for your solo bus. You're also going to have your headphone jack. I've been told this one's just a little bit louder than everybody else's out there. Definitely something worth trying. You're going to have those 30 faders that we talked about, so 3 banks of 10, touch sensitive and motorized as well. And then you're going to have your mute buttons above those. You're going to have your solo buttons above that. And to the right, you're going to have your primary navigation on the S series. So this button is a bank down, this button is a bank up. That lets you move through the layers. You can quickly press those and jump to a layer or move around as needed. This button is your overview, so that's your primary, just showing you how the entire console is laid out. There's an edit mode in there as well, as you would imagine, to be able to rearrange how the console is laid out. This is for your set spill. So these are 10 channels, up to 10 channels. You can do 1, 2, or up to 10 that you want to quickly spill onto this surface here. So something like a lead vocal, or maybe more importantly, like a lead vocal's effects, subs on an aux or your master, or something that you want readily available at all times. You can put in there bumper music, front of house music, etc. And the last thing to really talk about on this surface, you're going to have that assignable master. This can be assigned to whatever you want in the software. It's going to come defaulted as the master, but you could change this to a solo. So if you're doing monitors from here, that make a lot more sense. It could be a subs on an aux, whatever it is that you want to control. And then you have snapshot navigation. These are previous and next snapshot buttons. And then you have a headphone jack, which is under the front of the console. Now we actually make a smaller version called the S21, and it has everything the S31 has, except it has 2 displays, 2 banks of faders, so we end up with a total of 21 faders, hence S21. All the same features, everything I just told you back. Same thing on the back as well, with same amount of connections, same amount of I/O, same amount of DMI slots, same formats as far as how things connect together. Now it's important, and I want to take a minute to stop here, nothing has really changed as we've gone from Quantum to SD to S series. So while the Quantum has more FPGAs than the SD series and the S series has, they're all a derivative of that same original engine that we create, meaning that the audio algorithms for busing and for processing audio, for dynamic EQs, for multiband comps, for just standard channel processing, high pass and low pass filters, all of those are available. That floating point processing that we started off this entire webinar with, that's available across this entire line of consoles. So the audio quality you're going to get out of an S series console is far better than any of our competitors anywhere close to this price point. But that's only made possible because we can take what we've already developed and be able to scale it down and just be able to change things out, like using an ARM processor versus an industrial PC, as we do in the SD and Quantum series. All right, Matt, is there anything else that we need to talk about? Gentlemen, any questions that we need to talk about on these surfaces before we actually get into our I/O racks?
No, I think you did a great job there, Ryan. I think the one thing that's nice is you can pick the model that you need for what your requirements are today with a little bit of growth, so it's a good system for the next 5 or 10 years. And depending on what you're looking for, there's a lot of people that are trying to do their broadcast mixes right now. So that's a great way to even grab a 21 or 31, as well as we've got some other stuff we'll show in a little bit, the 4A4, which might fit that application as well. So let's move on to the racks.
All right, so first up are our SD series of racks. Now SD, SD Mini, and SD Nano are pretty much the same rack. We'll talk about what makes them different, but for all intents and purposes, just large, medium, and small. The SD rack here has 56 inputs and 56 outputs. So you're actually going to see there's a card. This is one of our 32-bit pre's. It has 8 mic pre's per card. 7 cards. Not that great at math, but I can do this one. That's 56 inputs. Same over here. We have our 32-bit output cards. So this is 8 channels of outputs and 7 cards, so 56 out. Now what's important, while there are 14 slots on this rack, so 7 plus 7, 14, You are limited to keeping input cards on the input side. So the first 7 slots are reserved for inputs. The last 7 slots are reserved for outputs. The only exception to this is if you're using an I/O card. So we're going to go through those in a second. Excuse me, but those are going to be things like an AES in and out card where it's got in and out on the same card. Those need to go on the input slots. So let's say I had an AES I/O card in this application. I would probably actually put it here in slot number 7. So it's an input slot. It's going to have input and output on the same card, and we're going to need to leave slot number 14, so output slot number 7, the last one, blank. It's because this is taking care of I/O, and if you want to really know what's going on, slot number 7, the output side, and slot number 14 are actually paralleled together. So it's really only going to see one of those cards in there, and it's going to defer to seeing that first one. So as we said, there's no real way to get around this. If you need more than 56 inputs, you need to move on to another rack frame, which is why we have the other rack frames available if you just need a few more inputs. But this one maxed out will give you 112 channels, so 56 in and 56 out. MADI is standard on this rack. However, once again, if you're in the US, Opticore is standard with this one as well. So if you bought a package with a Quantum 3 or a Quantum 5 or a Quantum 7 or an SD10, you're going to have an SD rack paired with it with 32-bit pre's as well as your Opticore, and the Opticore on here is going to match the format of Opticore that you choose for the console. So back to what Matt Larson mentioned earlier, HMA if you're in a touring application, permanent or a portable application, or if ST connectors if you're in a permanent install facility as well. So MADI is standard. You have things like sample rate conversion. So on here, we can actually take the output that is being fed out of a MADI split scenario, and we can do what's called a system divided by 2 sample rate conversion. So here we're maybe say we're running at 96K. This one can actually feed out simultaneously at 48K, which is really useful to have, especially when you're tying into broadcast, or if you're just trying to do archive and record things. It's a great way to minimize the amount of space that you're taking up for archival recordings off of there. As mentioned before,
and there's one other cool feature, Ryan, is on that third split there, is it does have the ability to also turn on your digital gain tracking. So like, let's say you're feeding a non-DiGiCo desk and you've dialed in your mic pre's, you could turn on that digital gain tracking. So then if the front of house or monitor guys in the main room were to turn up that mic pre up or down, it won't affect the record level. So it's a really powerful rack.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for how we actually set up this, what we call the MADI pod, as Matt mentioned earlier as well, and you'll see it labeled there, we actually go into a lot more detail on that Digital Audio Protocols webinar. So we'll show you the menu structure, how to get in there, turn on gain tracking like Matt Larson just mentioned, as well as doing any of that sample rate conversion if needed. Just brief overview as well, you're going to notice redundant power supplies that are available in that rack also. Now, a standard configuration of this rack isn't actually what we're showing you. Typically, you're going to see 56 inputs, 40 analog outputs, and then we typically do AES outputs for the last 2 slots. Here in the US, we call that an EX configuration. So that is very standard across the touring industry. Just about all of your major providers have them configured that way. Obviously, they'll configure them as needed for a tour, but if you bought a package, that's what you could expect. Over here, this is the SD mini rack. Now, for those of you who are keen observers, you'll notice that this is also a MADI pod, and we actually just rotate it on its side to get it to fit in here form factor wise. It's got all the same features that Matt just went through and I just went through as far as sample rate conversion, gain tracking. Opticore is an option, though it's primarily standard here in the US as well. MADI is standard on here as well, and you're going to have external word clock inputs and outputs. Now, this one is a little bit different in that it has 4 slots, and these can be all 4 can be inputs, so you can have 32 inputs, or you can have 32 outputs, or you could have 32 I/O. So 32 by 32 if you had things like AES cards or HD SDI cards or Dante cards or something in there that featured inputs and outputs on the same card. And then we have the Nano Rack. So the Nano Rack is a simplified version. We actually don't have MADI on this one. It is not standard. Opticore comes as standard on here, primarily because we don't really think you would want to eat up an entire MADI stream with just potentially 16 channels of audio, more likely something like 8x8. The two slots on here work just like the mini rack, where they can both be ins, they can both be outs. You can have them here, we have one in and one out, or they could be 16 by 16 I/O if you were using, once again, those ASIO cards or HDSDI cards or something like that. You still have word clock input, you still have USB for control of the rack or updates to the firmware if needed, but that is standard on the Nano.
Hey, Ryan.
Sir.
There's been a question I thought would be a good time to jump in with.
Sure.
Pro Audio Guy has asked, is it possible to retrofit a non-optical SD rack with optics?
Absolutely. So you contact your distributor. I'm not sure where you're located in the world, but contact your distributor. You can look those up on the DiGiCo website. Just tell them you need to add OptiCore to that SD rack, and there will be a kit that'll have a OptiCore PC board. Should come with that metal plate that Matt mentioned earlier as well. And we have technical notes on how to do that. It's not terribly complicated to be done, but if you've been inside of a computer, inside of your console, you're going to be able to handle this side of things, but most of the distributors as well as the factory are available to support if you do have questions during that process. But absolutely, you can update an SD rack or an SD mini rack that was purchased with MADI only, can be upgraded to have OptiCore.
Hey, with that brought up, the same goes true with all of the SD series and the Quantum series. If you were to have a desk that does not have optics, with the only exception would be the SD9 and the SD11. You just have to look at the back of the metalwork to see if it actually has the metalwork that can actually receive the OptiCore upgrade. So what we typically do is ask people just take a picture of the rear of it with the serial number and send it to us, and then we can confirm that it actually would work.
Exactly. Thank you, Mr. Larson. All right, let's talk about cards. So these are the I/O cards that are available for the SD rack. The first up is that beautiful 32-bit mic pre card. So actually, he's on the call, Mr. Page, Dan Page, did a fantastic video talking about why we developed this card, why we thought it was important to push the boundaries of this. Highly suggest you go see that video as well. That is available also on the DiGiCo YouTube channel. Just look up that, I believe it is labeled 32-bit mic pre's or 32-bit I/O. I forget what the exact title is, but they'll take you through that in much greater detail and why we implemented that. So the blue one is the new one. That's the 32-bit mic pre. We also have our standard 24-bit cards. Those are still available. And you'll see these in a lot of production companies, a lot of installations are still using these. As you saw from the chart earlier, still a fantastic card. We just knew we could push the bar higher, and that's what we like to do at DiGiCo. There is a 32-bit output card. So once again, same type of thing. I believe, Dan, you cover this on the video on YouTube as well.
Absolutely.
Yep, and we have the 24-bit output card as well. We have an AES input card. We have an AES output card, and if you guys want to see something amazing, you see what we did there? We put the AES I/O on the same card. So anyway, basically crammed together, this is one of those I/O cards that we were talking about. Now we can also do AES I/O via a BNC, so an unbalanced AES version that's supported by the protocol. Primarily our video friends use this. I believe there's some joke in there about them being unbalanced, thus preferring this anyway. But anyway, you guys get the point. We have that option card, same capabilities, just different connectors. There's an AES42 card, so this is that digital mic pre protocol. So this physically allows me to control a digital microphone directly from this card. So if you're in a performing arts center, that's typically where I see these. You have some of those Neumann digital microphones. You can slide one of these in, keep it digital all the way through, and be able to control those mic pre's that reside within the capsule or the control box for that microphone. And then we make a Dante card for the SD Mini and Nano racks. Now, economically, it makes a lot of sense to move to something like an orange box with a DMI card, or just add a DMI card to something like the Quantum consoles or the SD12. But sometimes you just need a few channels in and out, and you don't want to invest in another box to do so. And that's exactly why this card was developed. So it's 8 channels by 8 channels. It is an I/O card, so it's going to have 8 by 8 on one card. You'll need to put this in the input slot as well. And then you have that HDSDI card that I was talking about. So this is 8 channels that can be de-embedded from that video stream, and then 8 channels that can be re-embedded. It has delay individually per channel of audio that you put back on, as well as a separate delay control for the video. So this can actually delay video up to 15 frames. This is a fantastic way to be able to handle lip sync. What I like about it is it puts the control in the hands of the audio engineer. So they're the ones watching. They're probably taking out one of these outputs off of the monitor as well, and being able to view what's going on in the stream, and they can make sure that everything is synced. Lip sync is as it should be, going right to the video stream. The last thing to mention on this card is it has a failover, or basically in the event that the system is powered off, or maybe depending upon your workflow, you might leave the audio portion of broadcast off. This will allow the signal to pass through. So it'll go in to out, and without having the system on. So if nothing's on, it just passes through unaffected, which is a fantastic, not only for redundancy, but also for the ability for just modifying your workflow and how the system is set up. Now, the last one up there is the Aviom card, Big Blue. So this is a double width card slot. So there's 16 channels of outputs, and you'll notice all of our card slots are 8 channels. So to be able to get 16 out of this Aviom D16 A-Net card, you'll need 2 slots reserved for this. Now, there's some caveats that come with this card. When this was developed, it did not feature sample rate conversion, so you're going to need to run your system at 48K. Also, if you need more than 16 channels, I do believe Aviom had a way where you could use, I think it was called a system bridge, to be able to tie these cards together so you could do more than 16 channels. However, most of you who are using Aviom definitely know that there is a new distributor out that's called a D800D. That D on the end means Dante, and I can just push Dante into that directly. So easy way to do up to 64 channels, and definitely more economical. Now, here is the short version of what Dan talked about in his detailed video on the 32-bit mic pre's. Basically, as you move and add more bits for conversion, watch the signal to noise ratio, so what we have available, so the dynamic range, watch that increase. 144, as we mentioned before, when you're taking 24 bits in, that is that theoretical dynamic range of the mic pre. You'll notice the significant jump that we make from 144 dB to 192 dB. But the other thing that is staggering is the sheer number of actual points at which we can sample that that analog signal. So it goes from 16 million to just under 4.3 billion. That's a lot more detail that we're able to capture in there as well. So as I mentioned, go check out Dan's video. A great way to get more detail on that card if you're interested. All right, now there's D-series racks. So this is the D rack and the D2 rack. These are fundamentally the same rack, just a little bit different form factor, different I/O count. But the important part about this is these are fixed I/O racks. They'll typically have an optional output card section, but by and large, they're typically going to be a fixed rack. This is a definite way for us to cut down cost. So the less metal work, the less, everything that we have to get involved on this. These racks also don't have 192K converters. They only have 96K converters in them as well. But you'll notice here on this D rack, we have 32-bit pre's. There is an option to retrofit these with AES input cards. So if you do need AES input cards on these are available. You can change them out in 8-channel chunks. So start here, add the next one. This could all be AES inputs if you needed it to be. It comes built in with 8 channels of outputs, and then it has another 8 channels that you can make line level outputs or AES outputs, or you can replace all 16 of these with an Aviom card that'll fit here in the rack. It comes standard with MADI over Cat5 connections. It has an optional octa-core connection. So if you want to be able to put this as a portable throwdown rack in your system, or if you're trying to meet a price point for installs, you could add a bunch of these racks together, throw them on octa-core, still get a lot of channel counts at 96K, but once again, they're more economical. This is the D2 rack. This is a 48 input rack. So you'll see here we have inputs number 1 through 24. And then we actually have a version where you can take 25 through 48 and have those be analog or AES. So those are available versions to you. So once again, if you need AES inputs, you can do that. Then you have 16 built-in analog outputs, and then you have 16 available outputs that can be analog, AES, or Avion. This is one of the only racks that is only Cat5e or BNC MADI coax. It does not have an optical option on it, so it's very important to know that as you're speccing systems or speccing out what you need for a production. So no optical available on this one. All of the rest and everything, as I mentioned before, have redundant power supplies and then those optional output cards. All right, I'm going to jump on to what we call our solutions section. So this is basically all the accessory bits for us to be able to get in here. First off is probably the most popular, and this is the little red box. It is little and it is red. We are not incredibly creative when we name things, obviously, but what this is designed for is to be able to take in an input from something like a D rack or a D2 rack and be able to split that out to another, like an SD9 and maybe an SD11 or another SD9. So two consoles sharing one rack. If you want more details on how this box is supposed to be used, you need to check out our other webinar on digital audio protocols. We go through how this works, how to connect them, which console gets control of mic pre's, etc. The other thing you can use this box for, though, is actually being able to take BNC in and out of that connection to this rack. So if I wanted to take something like an SD rack that is going to have its MADI on it, and I want to be able to take MADI in and out of that rack and connect it to that same SD9, I can do that here. You just need to toggle the switch here that goes between split and MADI, so that'll won't split this rack. It'll go grab the MADI in here and share those to the two console connections, both full connect and receive only. It is powered via USB, so you're going to need to accommodate for that, and your racks can be powered off of a console if it happens to be living in the doghouse of the console. It can also be powered off of pretty much any standard 5-volt USB charger as well. We make a companion to the little red box that is creatively named the little blue box. This is designed kind of in the opposite scenario. I want to take a Cat5 based rack, but this time I want to split it to BNC based consoles. Think about something like the SD12, the SD8, the SD10. I want to be able to take something like a D rack and connect it to those consoles. This is what you would use. This allows for a full connection, so the full connect here in and out, as well as a split or auxiliary send to a shared console, somebody that's just getting a split. We can also simultaneously share to a Cat5e based console, so like something like the 9 or the 11 as well. Still powered via USB. You can pass through to go from like a little red box to a blue box, or from one little red box to another, so just a lot of flexibility there in your setup. Now, the purple box is basically, it's had its heyday here in the last couple of years. As far as I know, it is still one of the only dual MADI stream optical MADI to coax MADI. That would include Cat5 MADI as well, but it's going to convert those streams to full MADI streams worth, have redundant power supplies, and be in a rack mount chassis. There are a lot of optical MADI to coax MADI converters out there. None of them are rack mounts, and none of them have redundant power supplies, and at most you're just dealing with a little box that's got to get velcroed to a shelf somewhere and have a wall wart attached to it. So this is a fantastic solution for being able to convert and do longer runs, so we can extend a connection from a console to a rack. A lot of our corporate users use these, so they can run fiber up to the stage and then break out from coax or Cat5 to there. And it comes with MADI connections. What you're actually seeing here are the ST MADI connections. So they can come with ST, HMA, or optical con. You can also get this ordered with single mode or multi-mode fiber, or we also make a specific set of transceivers to be compatible with a universal audio. So if you're using their live rack system, this is a great solution for that. And this just, we need to match transceivers that they're expecting to see as far as the light goes on those transceivers, but we can match those. It's a special order version that's available on the price list for DiGiCo dealers. If you're a user, please reach out to your dealers or to the distributors for more information about that. But the whole idea is this is going to convert both in and out to either Cat5 or to coax MADI and be able to handle that conversion. And once again, back to kind of that corporate scenario where you're extending them, you're going to need 2 purple boxes. So you're going to need something to convert onto optical, and you're going to need another box to convert off of optical back onto coax or Cat5. Now the orange box, this is the latest in the line of kind of our solutions range. And this really had to deal with all the differing pro audio protocols that are out there. And this is simply a format converter. So I can stick something like MADI on one end, something like Dante on the other. There's very little logic in here as far as routing any of that stuff that's going to handle. So it's basically going to take channel 1 on the MADI stream, go to another channel 1 on the Dante, and whatever's coming in via Dante channel number 1 is going to go out MADI number 1 in this scenario. So it's a 64 by 64 channel. There are a few exceptions to that, which we're going to cover on the DMI cards. Those will be the limiting factor of that. But basically 64 by 64 channel, it'll do that at 96K or 48K. Once again, depending upon the card and the format that's available. Redundant power supplies, and then we order them. We have these in packages. Matt Larson has put together a lot of the commonly used packages, MADI and Dante being one of those. We have some new ones involving the new Clang DMI that are out there, but these are pre-packaged to kind of the most commonly used versions that we see to simplify for ordering and also give you guys a cost break on those as well. Now, let's dive into DMI cards. So DMI is DiGiCo multi-channel interface, and you're actually going to see here that we have a lot of cards. So starting on our left, we have an AES I/O card, we have an Aviom card. Both of these are 16 channels. This is going to be 16 by 16. This is going to be 16 out only. That's that AN162 standard. There's MADI, so this is 64 by 64 at 48 or 96K. That is the 1B connection. Wave sound grids, that's 64 by 64 at 96K or 48K. This is A3232. This is for connecting to A racks, so A3232 racks, something like the A164 wall or the A168 stage. This is going to give you up to 64 by 64 channels at 96K. Then you're also going to have analog ins. So this is 16 channel analog input. These are line inputs. You're also going to have the companion analog line output card. There is a Dante card. So this is our standard Dante card that we shipped with. This is the Brooklyn 2 chipset that was very, very common across the industry. 64 channels at 48K. You cut down to 32 channels at 96K. Over here, we actually have the Dante 2 card, lovingly known as the Dante 64 at 96K. And that is giving us a full 64 channels at 96K. It also does auto sample rate conversion for you, meaning if the console is running at 96K, your Dante network is running at 48K, it will automatically up and down sample for you. So it'll convert what's coming from Dante to your console, it'll up convert, and then it will down convert the outputs from your console going back onto that Dante network. It'll also do the opposite if you're running in that scenario. You have a MADI RJ45 or MADI Cat5 here as well. You have an Opticore card. So Opticore, once again, every time we're talking about Opticore, you can specify the connectors with it. So you have HMA connections, ST connections, optical con connections. This can be in single mode or multi-mode. The caveat here with this card is it only shows up as a rack. So it only works in something like an orange box. That is really the only place it can go. So it's got a rack ID on that Opticore network. Means it's going to be limited to IDs 11 through 24. It will not fit in a quantum console that has a DMI slot. It will not fit in the SD12. It will not fit in the S series. It'll physically fit. It just won't work while you're in there. You also have a DMI mic pre, so this gives us 8 channels of mic pre that you can put into something like an S series or where you just need more mic pre's close to your surface. There's an AMM card. This is an auto mic mixing card. This gives you 48 channels on the S series of automatic microphone mixing, that's gain shared mixing, as well as 64 channels on the Quantum series and the SD12. You're also going to notice here we have in the Allen & Heath ME card. So this is one of those alluded to before with the Allen & Heath ME mixing platform. So for personal monitor mixing, this is 40 channels. It is out only, and there are no names that are passed along from the naming of this. So it just really is a great, easy way to get into their MEU, which is their hub for the personal monitor mixing system. You can also, by the way, fit that same hub with Madi or Dante. And if I were, in most cases, Dante is going to allow me a lot more flexibility in there. But obviously, you know, if you're trying to get economical, this is an easy way to throw that into something like an S series and to reach out to that series if you need to tie into a customer's existing Allen & Heath system. Now, the last one on the list is probably the least popular, but it's very powerful. That's the Hydra 2 card. This allows us to connect and get on and off that CalRec Hydra 2 routing system. So if you're on something like an Orange Box or which is the primary use of this, this is going to allow you to communicate between something like an SD10 and a Hydra system. You're going to be able to do gain control through that process as well. So bidirectional gain control, I believe, exists in there. You can also swap out those SFPs for Cat5s or LCs over single mode are the options for that one. Now, the last one is the newest one in the lineup, and that is actually the Clang DMI card. So this takes the entirety of a Clang Fabrique, actually multiple times as what it can do, and it condenses it into the form factor of a DMI card. This is amazing for a lot of applications, especially touring, houses of worship, where I can take my monitor console, I can stick one of these cards in there. There's no additional power supplies, routing, cables, etc. I can just plug this in, simply route and set up in my session to this card, return from this card, and that's going to allow me immersive three-dimensional mixing to be able to put that on whatever mix, whatever aux node, and whatever channel I want to within my system. Now, real quick, we're going to take you through a little more detail on what the automatic microphone mixing card is. So this is a screenshot of what you're going to see on your Quantum console or your SD12. Those are the ones with DMI card slots on the surface, which is why they're compatible with it. You're going to get 64 channels of auto mixing. That's what you're seeing here on there. And you're going to see that we have these inserted first. Which DMI slot do you have this present in? You could have two if you need that. You're going to see there's an A and a B group. So we could tie all these together on A. You're going to see the first 13 channels are on the A group, and then from that, the rest through channels 24 are on the B group. There's a send return, the percentage of share that input is gathering. Once again, this is a gain shared algorithm that we're using. You have control over the noise floor for both the A and the B group. Whether the A and the B group are even active, you can control those as well. So for those of you who do corporate, a simple way to be able to just pop a card in to the back of the console and to get some incredibly detailed and precise automatic microphone mixing on both the S series as well as the Quantum and SD12 consoles. A little more detail just on that screenshot. You'll see here that you can do the routing just by selecting where it says T1 here, and then you're just going to go grab the channels. Currently, those are labeled T1, so that's all it looks like. That would be your talk input number 1. So that is grabbing it from the channel number 1, and it is doing the post-fade insert point for you. So it's actually going to grab that point and do the routing from there. You'll see it is sent to audio I/O port number 4, which is AMM number 1, and the return goes back to number 1. So that's how it looks like from the channel aspect. All right, now on to another product range. This is the 4x4 system, and I have been told that is how we are supposed to pronounce it, although however you want to call it is just fine with me. So whether that's 4x4, area 4, 4 area 4, I've heard that as well. Once again, we're open to all of them. Now, this is new for us because everything I've shown you before is what I would consider a traditional mixing console, where you have faders and a touchscreen and encoders, and it's got the audio engine housed inside of that. This is essentially what I would call a headless console. So it is a console audio engine without physical controls. All of the controls get added to the system and they're network based. So we can have fader banks, we can have encoders, we can have GPI over the network, we can have that physically on there, we can have macros, we can have iPad control software, Mac or PC control software. Basically anything we want to do to be able to control this platform, we just build it to suit whatever's needed for that application. Speaking of applications, there are a lot of applications for this process. We're going to outline some of those at the end, but just kind of put in your head things like performing arts centers, houses of worship. They can be a standalone install all by itself. Areas where you have like smaller rooms, multiple campuses, areas that you need to just have a powerful audio engine between those. This will do that. Cruise ships are another application as well. So here we're looking at the front of the unit. You're going to see things like your macros. So we're going to see macro buttons here on the front. You're going to see a status display. This is essentially a secure place to put a USB drive. Saving and loading backups of your sessions is not a bad idea to hear, but also it can store WAV files to be played back when triggered via a GPI or something like that. You're going to have a physical headphone output. So this way, if we solo anything in the system, we'll be able to hear it from the equipment room. So it's a great way once again to check inputs into your system. And then here is a network port. This is meant for control. So once again, I'm walking into an equipment room. I can plug in my headphones here, plug in my laptop here, fully control the system here, solo inputs, etc. Now, if we go to the back of it, this is where obviously the majority of the I/O is. So we're going to start here. These should look familiar to you. These are SD rack card slots. So these can be inputs or outputs. You get 3 of them. And in this case, you're going to see we have 2 32-bit mic pre's and then 1 32-bit output card. Or sorry, 24-bit output card. So these can handle analog in and out, though both 24-bit and 32-bit. They can handle AES input and output cards as well as the I/O cards in those slots. Now, these should also look familiar to you. These are DMI slots. So the DMI slots, once again, are 64 by 64 channels. So we could have 64 in, 64 out of Matty, 64 in, 64 out of Dante. Or if we're using that new Dante 2 card, we would get 64 in by 64 at 96K. Somebody threw in an analog line input card here, so we can get 16 line ins of those. And then you're going to have octa-core added to here as well. So I mentioned that this octa-core card can go in an orange box. It can also go in the 4x4 system. Now you have redundant power supplies, so you only need 1 to operate. 1 can go to a backup battery backup unit if you need that. You have another switch network port that's for controlling and setting up your control for your fader packs or your controllers. And then you have 2 new formats that we haven't talked about so far, and that is A-Star and that A3232. I did talk about this one before, but these are 32 channels by 32 channels, and you get 4 individual ones of those. And then you have an A-Star port, which is multiplexed or condensing 4 32 by 32 streams into 1 A-Star stream. So this has a breakout box. I'll show you that in a second. Last thing to note here is we do have GPIO on the actual chassis. So if you need to hardwire in some controllers, external controllers, something like a QSys or a Crestron, a lot of that, we're implementing a lot of the network-based protocols from them. But in the meantime, if you need a physical contact closure to trigger something, you can do that on the back of this as well. Now, what is 4x4? 4x4 is 4 zones or 4 areas. Each has a dedicated stereo master. So that means it's a left-right output from each of those zones. In addition to that, you have a solo bus, which can be mono or stereo per each of those 4 zones. Then you have 128 channels, and those can get distributed however you want across those 4 zones. Meaning I have 128 channels in zone number 1 and nothing in the rest of the zones, or I could have 32, 32, 32, 32, or whatever channel variations I need. So if I have a larger room that needs more DSP, and then smaller rooms that need 8 and 16 channels each, I can do those as well. You have 48 auxes, groups, matrix, or effects. You also distribute those across those 4 zones as needed. You have a 500 and 512 point router. That is the core of this system. So this is actually going to give you point-to-point routing, as well as being able to route into those input channels and route those auxes and groups out anywhere you need to in the system. It runs at 96K. The cards that we're implementing allow you to do sample rate conversion. So like the Dante card, the Matty card, soon to follow. If you are running octa-core, for the time being, you do need to run that at 96K and the rest of your octa-core system at 96K also. Here you have 4 DMI slots, 3 SD card slots as we talked about, and then your remotes can happen via PoE controllers, so that's power over Ethernet. One of the controllers does require PoE plus. I'll show you that in a second. You have onboard macros, and as mentioned, Mac PC and iPad apps for control. Now here is one of those controllers. So this is a PoE powered single gang Decorus style input. So this is a rotary, so an encoder as well as a switch. So you can push the button in and out. That can let it select between multiple inputs or different functions, and you can push it in and move it around also if you need that. It can be a fader or source select. It'll give you the level of the input, the name of the input. It is a single gang Decorus style. Different colors are available, and as mentioned, it is PoE powered. So this is basically 6 of those crammed into one. So this is PoE powered as well. You're going to see here we've added dedicated mute buttons, solo buttons. You have the 6 encoders, which are dual mode, so you can push and turn those around as well. And then we added 6 bank buttons. So these can be like if you had more than 6 inputs that you wanted to control, you could set up the additionals on other banks. You could also use these other buttons to fire snapshots. So maybe a specific room layout that you wanted as well, or have this into GPO command to trigger projector screens or displays to turn on. Here's the one I mentioned that does require PoE Plus, so that is a higher current version, so it can drive these moving faders. So you have 8 moving faders on here, 6 banks as well, so those can all be just as before, 6 banks of faders, or we can use these buttons to do anything we want. 8 of those TFT displays along with the mute and solo buttons. Here's one of the A168 stage racks. It's designed to work with both the 4U4 system as well as the S-Series consoles. So this is 16 in, 8 outs. There is a rack mount kit available for this if you need that. And it can operate with either redundant connections or in a daisy chain. So you can actually go from a console or the 4U4 onto this box and from this box onto the next box. Here is possibly one of the coolest in-wall racks that we have. So it is 16 inputs. So you're going to see here 16 inputs, 4 outputs, and it has LED scribble strips. So these are backlit scribble strips. By pressing this display mode button on the front, you'll actually activate the backlight. So it's off by default. You turn it on when you want to actually see those labels. And as you name the channel on the 4U4 software, it will actually push those labels to these channels. Same thing with the group outputs and aux outputs. So if we want to be able to name something like mix 1 or wedge mix or IEM mix or something like that, it will allow us to be able to label the physical outputs, kick, snare, hat, etc. We're going to be able to see directly on this box. So this can fit in a NEMA 12x12 back box. You can hardwire the power, or it's IEC available here as well. And there's a flange that comes with it if you're mounting it just kind of standalone into a wall as well. But it's a fantastic option. It's just really powerful. Same protocol, so you can go from a console like an S21 or S31 onto this box and then onto the next one, or in the 4U4 system, just daisy chain is the most common way we're seeing that done. Now, as mentioned before, the A-Star is multiplexed, or taking 4 of those A3232 streams and condensing them down to 1. So you'll need something like this. This is the breakout box for A-Star. You take your A-Star connection to the 4U4, bring it to here, and it breaks out into 4 individual 32 by 32 channel breakouts. It's got IEC input for power, universal power supply, obviously fault and error indicators there as well. If you were doing a redundant setup, you would need 2 of these. Now this is also a remote GPIO network-based interface. So if I want to add more GPIO to the system or remote that GPIO to a further point with the 4U4 system, I can do that. It is PoE powered, so I can just plug this into a PoE switch, and then I can have 8 more GPI and 8 more GPO connected here as well. All right, now, really quick, I'm just going to take you through examples of what we're dealing with here. So this is a standalone system. We have a 4U4. We're actually going to feed off to our amplifiers and processing. We're going to do that either via analog or something like Dante. We're going to feed out to those systems. We have room controls. So in meeting room number 1, 2, and 3, we have controls for those. Those are PoE powered off the switch. We have a rehearsal space maybe that has a smaller A control 6 and then one of those A164 walls. And you'll see that is hardwired its connection to an A3232 port. And then in the live venue itself, we may have a couple of 168 stage. Maybe we want to add a couple of A164 walls. And then we have an A control 8, so we can have physical faders for that control. You'll notice all of my controllers go back to this PoE plus switch, and those are connected to the main unit. We also have a control computer that could go to a wireless access point for something like an iPad app, etc. And then all of my audio actually goes to these A3232 ports in this setup. All right, now this is a little more complicated setup, but this is a performance venue. So obviously in your performance venue, you're going to have an SD7 here and here for front of house and monitors. This green loop here is an octa-core loop, and we've actually added in that octa-core card here to the 4U4. So this actually makes a loop around, allows us to connect our consoles, our SD racks, and then our 4U4, which shows up as a rack into the system. This gives us 64 by 64 channels onto that octa-core network. We can still feed our amplifiers and processing the exact same way, so through that Dante or analog outs. And then we have controls that we can have zone controls for how loud it is or for source select. Those are going back to a PoE plus switch. And we have our in-wall I/O box, our controllers, kind of the same as what we did before. I'm going to show you a slide in a minute, but we can actually take control of these I/O boxes from the SD7 if we need that control as well, or actually from any other SD series or Quantum console. Here's a house of worship example, because obviously you have an SD7 in your house of worship also for front of house and monitors. A couple of SD racks over here. We've looped this into the octa-core, still feeding processing via Dante or analog. You're going to see that maybe we have a remote building, or this is just really far away. So we've sent this connection here and to that A-star connection to the breakout box. So now we can take every one of these A164 walls, connect back to our breakout box here. All these controllers go together to a PoE plus switch, sit on the network, so we can actually talk to this 4U4 for control. Now, if you want to go into more depth on this unit, I would actually suggest you jump into, surprisingly, the DiGiCo YouTube page, where you're going to see one of our first webinars we started in this series, diving into a lot of detail on the 4U4 system, including walking you through the software, basically how this entire system works. So if you want to check that out, search that on the YouTube page as well. One of the last examples we have here is for a large theater. So obviously you're going to have an SD7 or a Quantum 7. I think you guys are picking up on how this works. We have a 4U4. We have a couple of SD racks as well, all looped in running that octa-core. We have a breakout going. We have a main stage inputs. And we're actually going to be able to control all these from that Quantum 7. We've thrown in a couple of backstage controls just for backstage speakers, green rooms, etc. Now, how do we get that control? You can either control from an SD series or Quantum console via octa-core or MADI. So either are going to allow you to do the same thing. There is another drop-down option in the software where we can actually go in on the DiGiCo side of things. I think that's a future slide where I'll show you this, but it's actually going to show you that you can select a 4U4 as an I/O device. On the 4U4 unit, you actually need to set up your tie lines where you're taking something like the inputs from this A3232, which is connected to A3232 port number 1, and we're actually tying them to the octa-core send, I believe. Actually, in this case, we're doing it to a DMI number 1, which doesn't make sense in our analogy, so don't follow too closely. But that would be the ADC card. So obviously, we need to patch that to either the MADI or the opto cards in here. We just announced these racks as well, which will be shipping shortly. These are the Dante versions of the same type of rack. So we can either connect these up via A-Star or we can connect these up via Dante. And we would still be able to take control and pass along control to those SD series when that new software update comes out. Now, once you're in there, you need to configure the port, the I/O settings. So that DMI port number 2, that was an octa-core card. And so here, it's a MADI B card. Do we want it to have full control of the rack? Do we need to default out the rack? We need to set it up for rack control. It's going to show us our sample rate, etc. And then as far as the DMI port number 1, in this case, this was an octa-core card. So this has an octa-core ID of 11. It's running at 2G. We've set it up in 56 channel mode so it can do the gain control as well. Once again, for more info on that, definitely check out the YouTube page for the video on the 404 system. Now here is showing you the SD series software on the console. This is the I/O page. So here we've selected a 404. We're selecting down here that it's going to be a mic input. We could set that from either of these, actually any of these 3 green areas. So an A3232 rack, the line inputs, the 32-bit pre's, or that Dante-based SD rack, or A168 rack. So we're going to select that it's a mic input, and then we're going to have line outputs here. So once again, those could be any of those line outputs, and that's the basics of how we route and control, and we set up those systems to work.
That was pretty amazing there, Ryan, on the 404 system. Mm-hmm. I think what we should do is just kind of look at how complete the 404 system is. The retail price of the brain is about $7,500. The Control 8 is about $1,900. The 16 box is about $1,895. So in about that $10,000 retail range, you can actually get a very, very complex 404 system for install for a cruise ship, corporate gig, front of house position. You know, as Ryan was showing you all these different examples, it's a pretty slick system. And these are systems that we actually have demos. So if anybody wants to have a play with them, we'd love to search out. Why don't we do this? Why don't we move into some of the questions and answers that we've got here?
Sounds great.
Dan, you want to throw up the first one for us?
Hey, Carl, did you find the ones that I just pinged you over? We'll start at the top, actually, and we'll go back to the beginning. Hardik asked a question about latency in digital mixers and how we deal with it, determining digital insert latency when it comes to using external kit and bits and pieces like that. Do you want me to have a go at answering that first, Ryan?
Yeah, go for it.
So we don't do any latency compensation. Part of the thing with our flexible architecture, the FPGA, and the way we can route any signal anywhere is actually it's almost impossible to calculate and automatically at least deal with latency compensation. It just requires you as an engineer to have a little bit of understanding of the way we route the signals, your busing structure, your signal flow, all of those sort of things. When it comes to using a digital insert, obviously there's no A to D and D to A stage. And when we're doing physical inserts or any sort of I/O interfacing, it's primarily the A to D and the D to A stage that add most of the latency when it comes to inserting a signal. So from a digital point of view, actually, there is very little latency. You end up, we're talking in samples rather than milliseconds. But generally, we do get asked a lot about latency. And the other thing I'll point out about latency, and I don't think we've covered this today, and it's not really sort of a software thing, but people are used to managing latency, plug-in based architecture, turning things on and having to deal with different time alignments down channels. And if you're inserting our own EQ, our own dynamics onto a channel, actually it has no effect on the latency whatsoever. You could switch all the EQ and all the processing on one channel into circuit, as it were, and have none in the others. And when you sum them, at the end, there is no difference in timing. So we don't end up with this situation where we have to, by design, manage differences in latency. So it's sort of a difficult question to sort of answer in a short sense, but one of the things that we have in the flexibility is a very low latency signal path through the channels. There is no latency when you're switching things in and out. And when it comes to digital inserts, of course, there's no A to D and D to A stage, so we don't have to manage that.
And our channel processing block, real quick, let me jump in here, Matt. Our channel processing block is also a fixed latency, which we do have available for you, and we can go into more detail on that at another time. But that means it's a known constant. So if you are routing through and dealing with a very weird processing or routing situation, we know what that delay is going to be. We know what that latency is going to be, and you can compensate for it if needed.
Absolutely. And I think, from an engineering point of view, it's really important that you understand your signal flow. You could take an input channel, send it to a bus, bring the bus into a matrix, take the matrix output back up an input channel, send it to an aux. You can build these really flexible, amazing signal paths, but you have to understand what you're doing to it and why, and the consequences of those actions. So we can't change the laws of physics. We can't add latency or compensate for latency in these sort of situations. But as Ryan says, we know the numbers. and we know what our processing blocks do and don't do, and that makes it easy for you to understand what you should and shouldn't be doing.
I think a good visual way to think about what you just explained, Dan, is that when you have a channel strip input or output, whether things are on or off, essentially we're still going through the same math, if you will. So Absolutely. It's just a matter of the visual indication whether that circuit is actually turned on. When we get into, say, Waves plugins, if I've got, we'll say 30% of my stuff going through a Waves plugin, and the other 70% are not going through a Waves plugin, well, then you would just run those through a bus and use their alignment on a non-used rack, if you will, rack module.
You know what I think.
One of the things
this means. Yeah, I think this means, Kyle. Can I get your camera up here? I think, Kyle, this means we're going to have to do a webinar on latency.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Do you think maybe even more than one, like maybe 3 webinars on latency? What do you think about that, Kyle? Does that sound good?
Sounds like a little bit of overhandling. I don't know.
All right.
All right.
Let's go to the next question here. We've got Winston Williams. The Clang card in the S series. Will the Clang card be available in the S series?
I have been told yes, that will be coming. It is currently not supported, but I've been told that will be coming.
Yes, in the next, I had a word with R&D. In the next major software release for S series, support for the Clang card is coming. We haven't covered Clang today, but actually, if you tune in tomorrow night, I'm probably jumping the gun a little bit. I think there might be a little bit of Clang talk tomorrow night here, over on Facebook at least. But yes, support for the Clang card is coming. 64IO DSP on the board. It won't deliver the Clang integration that you used to from an SD and quantum perspective, but for audio interfacing and having the Clang engine, absolutely yes.
Fantastic. Next question from Dustin Muncie. Waves retrofit.
So that's a great question. So I assume, like, if you bought an SD8 or an SD9 and you didn't have the Waves card from the factory, those are available. We can do a retrofit. And we don't recommend that users do these. And in fact, in most cases, we don't even allow users to do these because you are physically making connections to the audio engine. And that's the FPGA that we looked at one of the very first slides. There, as you can imagine, there's a lot of money wrapped up in that one PC board. And if you were to damage that, then you would be responsible for that, and it's basically the majority of the console as far as cost goes. So if you let us do it or one of our techs do it, and we mess up your console, we have to cover that. So that is something that we do for you. These are available though. Now, as Matt mentioned, you do need the physical spot for it, much like Opticore. I believe the SD9 and the SD8 and even the SD11 all had the option for Waves from the beginning. And then all the rest of the consoles in the SD lineup and the Quantum, if you bought them in the US, they should have come with Waves standard on those consoles.
So just to clarify, is just the 11 and the 9, you want to just take a picture of the rear, and then we can confirm it's got the right metalwork. Okay, the next question we have is from Jingyang Pong. Can the 32-bit and 24-bit cards work within the same rack?
I got this one.
In an SD rack, yes. Go ahead, Ryan.
No, I was just going to say yes.
But it has to be in an SD series,
or,
SD rack or SD
or the 4U4.
Mini or Nano.
Yep.
Okay. Is each separate EQ for each AUX nodal processing, or is each channel all counted as one? So the question is with the nodal processing, is that EQ a separate EQ or not?
Matt, you want to take this?
Sure. So the best way to think of when we get into the Quantum engine is that you've got everything that all the SD series has: the delay, high pass, low pass filter, dynamic EQ, the 4 bands of parametric EQ with dynamics, all of your processing, Dynamics 1 and Dynamics 2. So that's on every single desk. When you add the nodal processing, that's an additional set of parametric EQ, an additional set of processing. So that's just in your nodal processing. So think that's a second chain of features that you have. Now, on top of that, if you add the mustard features, that's also in addition down that channel strip. So really, with the quantum engine, you get a load of processing. Now, you can also move that mustard processing, the nodal processing could be moved up ahead of the regular standard SD, EQ, and dynamics. So it's a very powerful setup. We do have some YouTube stuff that we've shot on the quantum engine. Absolutely worth taking a quick look. Some great engineers have actually also posted some stuff with their locked up with DiGiCo. So I hope that answers you. Let's see. So I think that kind of pretty much wraps up most of the questions that we had. We appreciate everybody's time here. There's some great guys that we see online that have been jumping on all these. We'd love to give everybody a shout out for spending the time with all of us, with Ryan putting this together, Dan Page, and of course Kyle McMahon in his industrial basement, or whatever you want to call that spaceship. Dan, why don't you go ahead and tell us about what we have going on this weekend?
Well, I'll leave Ryan to do a teaser for tomorrow, but Saturday we have Ramon, who is going to do a video on virtual sound check and some of his workflows. So that's going out on Saturday night. But we've got something special tomorrow night, haven't we, Ryan? We do, as we do with pretty much every Friday. On Facebook, on the DiGiCo Facebook page, you're going to see what's called an Ask Us Anything. This is where we just put a panel of people together and we kind of do a free-for-all. Sometimes we have a handful of questions that we've gotten emailed from our friends and family beforehand, and they said, hey, can we ask this question, something near and dear to your heart? But for the most part, it's Facebook Live, and it's there for you. So tomorrow, we actually have one of the, there's obviously many, many talented monitor engineers out there, but one of the premier right now, I'll put it that way, a gentleman named Cowboy, James Berry is his actual name, but monitor engineer for very high-profile artists. Beyonce is probably the most well-known, but also amazing artists like Lionel Richie and Fantasia and a lot of others. So anyway, he'll be joining us as our special guest. We'll also have Phil Camp from Clang joining us. A little teaser, Cowboy uses Clang in his workflow. And then Dan, I think you'll be joining us tomorrow night as well. Yep, Kyle, you'll be doing that. Matt, I think you're with us as well. So it'll be 1 p.m. Central on Friday, tomorrow. Then those obviously be posted after, but if you got questions, you're definitely going to be wanting to watch it live. And then I believe that's 7 o'clock in the evening? 7 p.m. Tomorrow is a public holiday here in the UK, but I will be here. And if you're locked up at home and have nothing better to do than, whatever. So just do 7 o'clock. Have your dinner, grab a glass of wine, and settle down with us. Fantastic. Once again, Kyle, thank you for producing. He's apparently moved into some sort of cellar now at this point. But Kyle, thank you for running everything for us today. Dan Page, thank you for staying up late and helping run everything for us, answer questions. Matt Larson, invaluable as always. Thanks for your insight. From all of us here, thank you for joining us today for the webinar. Greatly appreciate it, and we'll see you soon. Thanks. Thanks, Ryan.